argue that we need to abolish prisons. People respond, but what about the murderers? And what about the rapists? And what about the child molesters? Now, one of the arguments I would make is that prisons have helped to reproduce violence. Prisons are responsible for the continuation of the pandemic of violence against women. Prisons are responsible for our failure to address child sexual assault. Because once we relegate people to prisons, it absolves us of the responsibility of addressing the real problem.
Good.
And so, alternatives cannot be conceived of as singular. We cannot imagine creating an institution that would take the place of the prison. And so we have to think beyond the footprint of the prison. And so alternatives will have to consist of a whole range of ways of addressing poverty, illiteracy, addressing violence against women, recognizing the role that the state plays in producing and reproducing violence against women, the relationship between war and sexual violence, the relationship between police violence and intimate violence. This is a feminist approach. This is a feminist approach. Now we have to talk about modes of accountability. Because you may be wondering, well, what about people who really commit acts of harm against other people? How do we address that? We address it not by saying that if you hurt someone, the state is going to hurt you, but rather by developing a different sense of what justice means. Restorative justice, reparative justice, a justice that will create more harmony among people, among human beings, a justice that will help to create better human relations. And so, I would say that if you consider homophobic violence, for example, and there are many cases in which gay and lesbian and transgender people lose their lives to violence, to homophobic violence. Now, the question you have to ask is, how did that person who feels so passionately opposed to non-conforming sexualities get into his or her mind that the way to deal with this is by destroying the person? Did the criminal, quote unquote, think it up by himself or herself? No, it's a part of a pervasive ideology. And so, if we simply say that we can send the individual to prison, We leave the whole ideological structure intact. We leave the institutional structures that promote homophobia intact. So does this make sense?
Yeah.
So we have to begin to figure out how to deal with these issues of racism and sexism and poverty. Why do men feel that they can commit violence on their partners? Why do men feel, as the dean pointed out, some men feel that their wives are their property? They didn't make it up by themselves. It's not going to be resolved by sending that person to prison. And so we have to begin to think of very complicated processes and agendas of struggle that will eventually eradicate these issues. And then we need to figure out what kind of justice system we want. We need a justice system that will bring us closer together rather than pushing us further apart. And I often tell the story, which I relate in one of my books, about a young woman who was killed in South Africa, a white woman who was killed by black youth. And this young white student was in South Africa to help elect Nelson Mandela. She was not a representative of apartheid. She was someone who passionately believed that South Africa could be free. And that she was stoned to death and stabbed to death by a group of young black men. And then, to make a long story short, eventually the mother and father developed a relationship with the killer. And eventually the mother and father decided to treat the man who had killed their daughter as their own son. And the woman, whose name is Linda Beale, now says that she looks into the eyes of the man who killed her daughter, and she sees not violence, she sees not hate, but she sees the eyes that last saw her daughter alive, and that she learned how to love those eyes. Now so I propose that to you as a promise, as a vision for a very different kind of justice. A justice that would only be possible if we can eradicate all of the structural hindrances, such as racism and poverty and illiteracy and homophobia and war and deterritorialization. And I hope that I'm addressing the range of issues that you raised in all of the questions. If there's anything that I haven't evoked, you can let me know. But what I would like this meeting to accomplish is to stimulate further discussion. I don't think anyone has the answer, but we all need to begin to imagine possibilities of justice that are entirely different from the justice, the modes of justice we are familiar with. And I can say also, as I often say, we have to begin with ourselves. Because we have internalized retributive justice. We have internalized the notion of justice that is built on vengeance. And generally, when someone does something bad to us, our first response is, how can I get back at that person? What can I do to hurt that person? We have internalized the state. The state is in our hearts and our emotions. And we have to begin to develop the kinds of critical repertoires, critical practices that will allow us to move toward a better world and better ways of imagining the world. Thank you.